Welcome back to the part 4 episode of Sonic X Shadow Generations. We are at the very end, people. This game is almost over. And we begin with a Chaos Island challenge. In this episode, we are going to be, I'm gonna say fighting Mephiles, but in reality we're gonna be picking on him because he stands no chance. And I want to talk about how the English script and the Japanese script, once again, are very different. For example, the line that everyone associates at the current moment with the character is "I want to exist." He never says that in Japanese. Or at the very least, I didn't get the voice prompt of him saying that. I do not know if this is a change in the story or if it's a technical issue because I defeated him very quickly. In addition, I want to say that in both translations, let's look at the end of Pontaf to now. They're both fine. Starting with Forces, I will say that the Japanese version of Forces is a lot better, but at the end of the day, it's still the Forces' plot. I'm gonna make a separation. For this series of episodes, plot is the events that go down, whereas the story is how the story is, well, I can't use the word as part of a definition. Story is how the plot is told to us. Because Forces' plot is fine. The problem is that the story is not. And in the Japanese text, the Forces story it's still okay. It's not good in a sense. But at the very least, it's not annoying. There's something about Forces' English story, the way it is told, that makes it rather unbearable at times. Not always. Forces is the definition of the most okay Sonic game. But then we go to the next main entry. I would say Colors Ultimate, but let's be real, let's just use my personal favorite of the... I'm gonna call this the Forces trilogy, mostly because even though they all control differently, they're still on the same engine. Yeah, Sonic X Shadow Gens, Sonic Frontiers, and Forces. Specifically the Shadow section for Shadow Gens is on the Forces engine. All three of them are on that engine. And as such, they share a lot of similarities in how they function. But because of how the games are made, I can say that the Forces version is easily the weakest of them. And then we go to the Frontiers era, and I think that Frontiers of these three games is the best controlling one. I don't think that's a consensus, however. I believe that there is a rather large chunk of the audience that believes that Shadow Gens is the best controlling of the Forces games. And they're not all, they're not called Forces. This isn't a case like, Final Fantasy 13, 13-2, and Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13. They don't share any name. They're just built on the same engine, which is why I'm calling them that. But in terms of how they control, in the levels, they're all very different. Forces is very automated. Frontiers has, I think, the best combat. And Shadow Generations, it has weaker combat, but in exchange, it's more focused in its design. Now, I was watching two other playthroughs. I watched Griffin Gaming's playthrough, and I watched DSP's playthrough. And I'm gonna say it, those two are really bad at games. Now, DSP, obviously, everyone knows, but I'm honestly surprised at how bad Griffin is at platformers. I haven't seen anyone else play through this game. Well, that's not true. I did see Premi's playthrough, but I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't paying a lot of attention to his playthrough. I just had it in the background when I was editing. And for some reason, whenever I watch non-Sonic tubers play Sonic, it's always painful to me. And I don't mean painful physically, I mean on a mental level. Part of me can't comprehend, at least emotionally, how people can be so out of tune with a 3D platformer, be it Sonic, be it Mario, Spyro, Crash, or any other platformer that I did not name. Mostly because, I grew up on platformers, okay? I played Mario 1, Mario Lost Levels, Mario 2 USA. I played Mario 3, Mario World. I also played the classic Sonic games. Okay, Sonic CD, Sonic 2, 3 and Knuckles, and just had so much fun with them. I also played Sonic 1, which is a really good game. And I gotta say, I just love me some platformers, okay? Mario Sunshine will always be one of my favorites. I love Galaxy. And I gotta say that of the post-2010s era platformers, personally, my favorite is still Frontiers. I think that Frontiers is far better than Gens, but according to a lot of the reviews, that's not the consensus. And what I'm saying is, to tie it back to what we were talking about, because I realized I got a bit sidetracked, is the fact that out of the 3 games, Frontiers experiences the biggest change in translation. And that change in particular, when it comes to Frontiers, is Sage's motivation. In the English text, to my knowledge, Sage is trying to come to terms that she wants to have a family. Whereas in the Japanese text, Sage's motivation is questioning why she's allowed to feel. Which I think changes the narrative's tone. And also, hit detection didn't go after Japanese Amy, and you can tell because Japanese Amy still has many of the 2000s era quirks. They're not completely there simply because the 2000 era quirk would not be fully realized due to a lack of animation to back it up. And I gotta say, personally, for me to claim that current Sonic game is on the level of the 2000s, first thing they would need to do is get MAEKAWA to write the games. Okay, MAEKAWA, I respect MAEKAWA. MAEKAWA's writing, I think, is better than Pontaf and Ian Flynn. Ian Flynn writes like a comic book writer. Obviously, because he wrote the Sonic comics. So that makes sense to me. But when playing a video game, if it feels like a comic, it feels off. It's the same reason why a lot of early video game movies don't do too well. Same goes for a lot of movies that try to feel like a comic book. Because I think part of why Iron Man and Man of Steel were actually so good is because they weren't really comic book in their nature. They seemed like movies first rather than an adaptation. It doesn't feel like they're trying to adapt the comics of Marvel or DC. And same thing goes with here. When I play the 2000s games, it doesn't feel like they're trying to adapt a comic book. It feels like it was written as a game story. Now, that's why I think the Sonic movie does so well, is because it doesn't really feel like the Sonic games. They have a lot of callbacks to the games, don't get me wrong, but in truth, the movies worked because as standalone movies, they're fine. Now, I should note that, as of the time of this recording, Sonic Movie 3 is not out yet, even though it will be by the time this video is released. And 2, I haven't seen the English versions of those movies. I've only seen Sonic 2 in Japanese, and I saw the Spanish dub of Sonic 1 while in Mexico, and I watched it in Japanese. Therefore, I don't know how good of an actor Ben Schwartz is, but based on what I'm hearing, he's fine. Now, I think that Sonic Movie 2 is way better than Sonic Movie 1, but that's just personal preference at this point, because apparently, according to the movie-going audience, they think Sonic 1 was a better structured movie, but that's possibly just because the movie-going audience is not one-to-one the game audience. Because I like it when they make references to the games, but the movies themselves don't feel like games, they feel like movie plots. I'm pretty much going to say that this game, specifically, it doesn't have an issue with the mistranslation as much as it has an issue of mandates, okay? The Sega mandates and the hit detection and the modern ESRB can be felt throughout this game, and it shows with how the text is written, how events are delivered, so on and so forth. Because when you compare it to the 2000s era, realistically, they could just make it like the 2000s with better graphics, and I think you would actually be more successful. The issue with the 2000s wasn't actually the writing. In fact, the writing is probably one of the few things that the 2000s got right. And by writing, I don't mean the overall narrative, I'm talking about the character interactions. The character interactions in the 2000s, I would argue, was the best that the Sonic cast got. Especially if you watch the Japanese version. But I know that a lot of people who play Sonic in the United States or in the UK or in any non-Japanese speaking area tend to not play the games in Japanese, but I'm telling you guys, they really do change the writing, and in the case of this game, what's affected mostly isn't the story or the plot, it's the tone. One thing that, if you notice, that the Japanese versions of the game tend to have more mature tone. Not serious tone, not dark tone, just mature tone. And by that I mean that the writing doesn't treat the audience like a kid. Whereas I would argue the writing of Colors in the English text really... I mean, Colors even in Japanese was very comedic and lighthearted. But the way that they write the sentences, the way that they deliver the lines, it sounds more down to earth. And again, I know it's a cartoon hedgehog is the argument people make. They want it to be comedic. But personally, I think that when the story is taking itself seriously, I think that's when the series is at its best. I must say, for example, this scene, I will give credit to the English dub and the Japanese dub. They both do a good job. However, I'm going to be honest, the lines that Black Doom gives out in this version are way cooler. Okay, the fact that in the Japanese version, Black Doom calls Shadow an apostle of destruction, or something along those lines, that was badass. Aw, oh, crap, I put it in capital R. No! Oh well. Again, if you see a mistranslation anywhere, feel free to reach out to me and let me know, because I must admit, I'm not perfect. And as you can see, I put 2 V's for some reason, even though when I checked using the spell checker, that didn't pop up, but okay, the spell checker is not this lying to me. I guess I got to reread all my dialogue again next time I do a series like this. But I think that the translation, ignoring the misspellings, should be as close to the Japanese as possible. I did my best to not localize anything. In other words, I didn't try to make it sound natural in English. I tried to make it sound as close to what they said, which is why some sentence structures do seem off if you are fluent in English and don't speak another language, because in English, it's a subject, verb, object, whereas in other languages, like Japanese or Spanish, it's subject, object, verb. And in a translator note, I'm going to make reference to that to explain one of my uses of translation. Now, this is one of those lines that Maria just gave that doesn't have the same effect in English, because the English word for shadow is just shadow, whereas in Japanese, the Japanese word for shadow is kage. And so when she says kage, she's saying shadow in Japanese. But since English has shadow and shadow being the same word, it doesn't have the same effect, I think. I might be wrong. Maybe I'm just over-analyzing it, or maybe I'm just taking a children's game too seriously. But the thing is, if you're like me, you've been playing Sonic since 2006, so, meaning you've pretty much been playing this game for 18 years, in my case, or almost 19 years. In many countries, a lot of the Sonic games can drink now. Just to point out, okay, the 2000s was so long ago, and yet for some reason I still think it's the best era. Sure, the polish wasn't there. No, the 2000s games, besides Shadow, were buggy as fuck. When you really, analyze what was going on in those games. But it was just the way that the series carried itself, the tone of the series, it just worked so well. And I think this is partially why I decided to learn a whole third language just to play these games. This and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were the 2 games where I decided to learn Japanese, because in my mind, I thought to myself, there's no way the Japanese staff is writing this. There's no way. Which is why if you ever catch me playing the 2000 games, those will have English text, except for SA2 and SA1, mostly because they are victims of mistranslation on the highest accord. And that's has to do more with industry practice in the 90s rather than a censorship attempt by a consulting company, in this case Hit Detection. Don't get me wrong, even the Japanese version isn't safe from the censorship, okay? Rouge's outfit is changed and Amy's bio is changed. But that might not be Hit Detection. I think what that is the Sega mandates. Because while they have been loosened over the years, the Sega mandates have changed how the game is presented. That seems a bit weird to say for people who aren't big on the business side of games. Okay, people who just play games to have fun. Okay, people who don't take games like super seriously. That's not who I'm talking about. So you who don't take games seriously and just take it as a hobby, more power to you, man. Okay, I respect you for that. If you're like, man, you get very obsessive with things that you like, especially because you've been like me and you've been playing this series for almost 2 decades, it's a different experience, I would think. And the thing is, the reason I play so many of the old games, despite my age, because I'm actually a lot younger than you guys probably think, has to do with the fact that, you know, I grew up on my dad's systems, and my dad has all the systems from when he was a kid, and I got to try out a lot of these old school games. So when I play a lot of these modern games, I just feel disappointed. Do I think this should have been a $50 DLC? No. If you ask me, this game is probably worth $30, maybe 40, so I would wait on sale. It's not a bad game, mind you. As a platformer, if you're just looking at this from a purely from a purely gameplay perspective, in terms of wanting to replay the levels, get good at the levels, do the 100%, collect everything, find all the objects, you know, learn speedrun strats, then yes, this game has over 100 hours of content, and it's a great time through and through. I think this story suffers from not having enough time to develop everything as well as it could be. You know, as much as people don't like the story of 06, you can't deny that the story of 06 at least gave you enough time to follow the characters along and get a feel for them, even if you had never played Sonic before. I'm gonna be honest, I think first-time players are not likely to understand the emotional weight of the scene, of these scenes with Shadow and Maria, if they hadn't played Shadow 05. Or if they haven't played Adventure 2. Because if they did play Adventure 2 or Shadow 05, I think that these scenes hit a lot more. Okay, because I know very few people are like me. Okay, the majority of people did not do all 326 stories of Shadow the Hedgehog. They did not find every key without a guide. They did not complete the expert mode. Okay, legitimately, because, you know, a lot of people use the emulator and then the patch should just unlock it from the start. Not me. Okay, I did it on original hardware a long time ago. Could I do it again? I don't think I have the time for it. I definitely still have the patience because I do like Shadow 05 a lot. I think it's one of my favorite platformers of all time. But, you know, the writing is what takes it down. But that's going to be it for this episode. Have a nice day.